We are now pleased to be joined by someone many of you have likely become familiar with over the past few days from Sportsnet 650 in British Columbia, Canada. It's the man who broke the James Paxton news, Chad Dey. Chad, I want to thank you for joining us to talk a little bit about the deal. And as a Canadian permanent resident myself, I wanted to let you know that you're actually the first Canadian to come on the show. So it's nice to get a little representation on here other than myself. So welcome.
Thanks so much. I'm honored to be the first Canadian on the podcast. That's awesome.
It's pretty great. We don't get many, especially, with, talking about the Mariners all the time in Seattle sports on here. But I appreciate any opportunity we get to bring someone on from the Great White North. So let's get into this James Paxton deal. Last week, Ryan Divish on his podcast with Larry Stone said that James Paxton had basically contacted the Mariners and asked about a reunion, and they said no. This, of course, sent Mariners Twitter into a frenzy. There's already been a lot of anger towards ownership with how little they've spent this offseason, but you had actually tweeted at us that night saying that Divish had bad info, and lo and behold, a few days later, Paxton's now with the Mariners. So how do you think all of this played out? How did it all come together? Did the Mariners reject the idea of a reunion at first? Was it part of the negotiation process? And were the Mariners his first choice, or was he hoping to maybe go to Toronto or return to New York?
Well, there's a lot to digest on this, and it's funny that you mentioned. I did because I was getting a little bit upset with the reports, and you know what? I should have texted Ryan Divish to help him out, and I regret not doing so. But nonetheless, I think you can stem this reunion back to when James Paxton was traded to the New York Yankees. Jerry Dipoto let the Paxton camp know, and James himself, that, hey, once you hit free agency, we'll be looking at you again. I think it was a tough decision, a few years ago when they traded Paxton, along with Robinson Cano, Edwin Diaz, in what was kind of, time to retool this roster after failing to make the postseason on several attempts with that core. So I think this reunion was a bit of a long time coming for the Mariners organization. Mm-hmm. So let me refute one thing, though. First and foremost, James and his camp, Scott Boras, did not go to the Mariners and ask for a reunion. Okay. I think the Mariners really were intrigued after Jerry Dipoto and Scott Service both attended James Paxton's bullpen session earlier this winter, with Pax obviously rehabbing from various injuries last year. And I think when they got there, that's when they saw the velocity was there. He looked really sharp. And I think that's what really perked their interest into a reunion with number 65.
So going off of that, because health is obviously a huge concern here, with his injury history, the forearm strain last year. So what do you know about where he is right now, health-wise? We've obviously heard some good things from Tigers pitcher Matt Boyd, who's been working with him this offseason, saying he looks better than ever. Is that the kind of sentiment that you're hearing as well?
Absolutely. I think, what the Seattle Mariners are going to get is a very motivated James Paxton. If you go back to the 2019 postseason against the Astros, that's when James, first started feeling some effects of that back injury. And it got worse as kind of the offseason progressed, which led to him having to have an operation on what was a cyst, essentially, in his back, putting some compression on a nerve. Of course, how the story goes last season. I simply think he came back too early and, wanted to help that, club who was contending, and it just didn't go so well for him. And then obviously, when one part of the body doesn't work, especially with pitching, you tend to overcompensate in other areas. And that's what happened with the strain in the forearm there. So, going into this season, guys, I really think that, the Mariners are going to get a guy that's going to be, near the top of his game. All reports, indicate the velocity is back. That was, the first and foremost. He's been working on some other things with his secondary pitches. Obviously, Matt Boyd working out with him, in the Seattle area this offseason. he wouldn't say something like that if he didn't believe it. And I really think it's just going to be a really good reunion for the Mariners. Obviously, they're going to get a guy that's going to be able to shed some light and provide some wisdom to the younger pitchers on that pitching staff. And then, for James, it's a comfortable scenario. He knows the manager, he knows the general manager, he knows the training staff. He's got his own personal people that he works with for training and everything else in the Seattle area. So for him to go into this, 1-year deal, it's a perfect scenario for him to reshape himself and get back on track to where he was, because, as Mariners fans know, and the baseball world knows, it's only been, injury health that's kind of held this guy back from being a potential ace on any major league ball club.
And that kind of leads into my next question, because, when he's healthy, he's one of the better pitchers in the game. So going to a team like the Mariners, who aren't really built to win this year, seems kind of weird for him. So was it kind of a combination of hesitancy from teams on the market and the familiarity with Seattle and kind of the reputation they built now with how well their current staff works with its pitchers that was appealing to him? Or was it just the market? Was it a bit of both? I don't know. What was your feeling on that?
Well, I think everything kind of, plays into the situation. Obviously, if you look at the free agent market as a whole, there's not a lot of multi-year deals that were being, handed out by any Major League Baseball team. I think it also got to the point where James simply just wanted to play baseball, and the Mariners provide, again, that comfort fit. Again, knowing the training staff, the GM, obviously the manager, Scott Service as well. And, the one thing that, maybe some people overlook is the fact that James lives in the Seattle area during the off season, and I think that played a factor into this as well. And really it's probably, for him, an opportunity to give him a place where he can have success again, where he had a lot of success, in the past. And you know what, if the Mariners are out of, the race for the playoffs this year, it gives them another trade chip and potentially James to go to another contender, and for the Mariners to continue to, build on that core that they are building. And you know what, maybe this all works out extremely well, and maybe it ends up in a long-term contract for James Paxton and the Seattle Mariners. Who knows? It just, it's all going to be fascinating as things start to play out. In a couple of days at the time of this recording, spring training's here.
Yeah. How did the process of breaking the story kind of come about? Obviously, I don't, want to out any sources or anything like that, put you in an awkward position, but people, obviously notice that you're from Ladner, Paxton follows you, et cetera. What was the communication like, and what was kind of the overall feel from Paxton's camp about negotiations and where he'd eventually land?
I think it was always, a positive feeling for James. I think it's, you look at who he is as a player, but also a person. And he is a guy that I would say any of the Major League Baseball clubs would be lucky to have. Now, at one point, there's about 20 teams, interested in James. A lot of them either viewed in person or online in this COVID world, his bullpen session. And we're quite impressed with what he had to offer. I think he got rid of all those, injury questions when they saw him throw in that session. And as you guys know, sometimes these deals, they come together, they take time. And that was just simply the case here, for James and his camp. And, you mentioned the Ladner connection. Yes, James and I are both from Ladner, British Columbia, and we may or may not be pretty close friends as well.
I see. So, Chad, I want to thank you again for taking the time and coming on and talking a little bit about this with us. We're big James Paxton guys over here. I was at his no hitter, got a chance to meet him the next day. He's a great guy. We love having him back in the organization, and we're incredibly excited to see the big Maple make his return. So and we're going to have you back on when the Kraken finally take the ice. And hey, maybe you can give our listeners some pointers as they, begin their hockey fandom here in Seattle for when the Kraken, have to kick some Canuck ass,
Well, hey, the way things are going with the Canucks these days, anything's possible. But you know what? Let me just say, like, super excited for the city of Seattle to get an NHL franchise. You guys lost the Sonics years ago, and I know that was a tough pill to swallow, but I think, that city is going to embrace the Kraken, and it's going to create just a great rivalry that's never really existed in sports, between Vancouver and Seattle, with the geography and everything like that. So, happy to come on anytime to, talk Mariners or the NHL. Love all of it. So it's going to be a fascinating season, and let's hope that the Mariners can make a postseason push for the first time since 2001. It's got to happen sometime, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think we're getting close here, though, with the way that the farm system is looking, and they have the right people in place. They have the process, they have the people. Just got to put it all together. So, where can the people find you on social media and all that? You got anything you want to plug?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Chad_Dey, and I'll just preface that Dey is spelled with an E, so Dey, a little bit unique, but appreciate the plug, and like I said, thanks so much for having me, and really hoping for a great season of Mariners baseball.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chad. Appreciate it. Stay safe. That was a clip from one of the main episodes of the Control the Zone podcast, airing every Wednesday on our Patreon. Just $3 a month gets you access to this episode and every other main episode of our show, and you can get even more CtZ by becoming a tier 2 or 3 patron for $5 and $10 a piece to hear separate tier exclusive episodes on Monday and view our frequently updated top 60 Mariners prospect list. Visit patreon.com/Control the Zone for more information.